expand our imagination.
Justification for being worthless.
Hello and welcome to CBS News Weekly Political Roundtable. I'm John Dickerson. Today was supposed to be shutdown day, the last 24 hours of government operations before the money ran out. But disaster was avoided. The president and Congress agreed to keep the lights on for 2 more weeks. Hardly historic and still unresolved is the debate over what should be cut and by how much. The last time the budget took center stage in Washington, Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, and in a moment of historic symmetry, the former Speaker announced that he was joining, or sort of joining, the presidential race. To sift through the week's political events, I'm joined by Christina Bellantoni of Roll Call, Jonathan Martin of Politico, and Jeff Zeleny of the New York Times. Welcome to all of you. Christina, I want to start with you. 2 weeks of government continues so that the bickering over the budget continues. How much does this matter?
Well, it's crisis averted briefly, but what's going to happen is they're going to come to some sort of agreement. And then don't forget that this is only until the end of the fiscal year. We're talking September 30th, and then Congress has to sort of figure out what they're going to do with the budget again. What do you know? This is probably going to be happening again next January. And so it's really just these very temporary measures. And meanwhile, you've got very conservative factions in the Tea Party movement that's saying, shut it all down, quit compromising. And I think that it's not going to get very pretty.
Well, Jeff, set us up with where the politics are on this right now. Does anyone have the upper hand? Everybody, Republicans and Democrats, seem to want to avoid a shutdown for this little period. But where do things stand now in terms of political leverage?
I'm not sure who has an upper hand in this. I mean, I guess you have to give the upper hand to the president a little bit because if history will show, President Clinton fared better in the long term than Speaker Gingrich at the time of the last government shutdown. But in the end, House Republicans have a great degree of reason, at least the leaders have a great degree of reason to want to work something out. Speaker Boehner does not, in his heart of hearts, want the government to shut down. He wants, he's talking this morning in an interview with Wall Street Journal about really being serious on entitlement reforms and things. So I think this is going to be a test to see, is there a dynamic? Can there be some type of cooperation between this Obama White House and Speaker Boehner and the rest of the House Republicans? And we'll find out. But at this point, there's a lot of risk for both sides.
Jonathan, the Obama White House, the president put Joe Biden in charge of the small room, right? There's going to be a small room in which Biden and the leaders of both parties in both houses are going to get together. This is a long fight. I mean, we have the continuing resolution which funds government, then we have the budget fight, then we have the debt ceiling fight, then we have the entitlements fight. How do you see the president playing this? He's got Biden in charge, but he's not in charge so much, or he's not engaged.
It's fascinating how Biden has become the de facto congressional liaison over the course of the past 3 or 4 months here, really ever since the midterms, which I think, by the way, was one of the smarter things that this administration has done because he has so much capital with some of his old colleagues out there on both sides of the aisle. Yeah, I think, John, you get to the point that a showdown is coming, and perhaps it obviously wasn't today. Perhaps it'll be the debt ceiling. Perhaps it'll be when one of the CRs runs out. I have a feeling there's going to be a few more stopgaps here before the fiscal year is over. So I think there's going to be a showdown looming. There's going to be probably some blood spilled between Boehner and his Tea Party folks, because I think there is a view among a chunk of those freshmen that a shutdown would not be politically harmful. And that is not the view of the House GOP leadership. And so I think you're going to see the potential for 2 showdowns. Boehner versus his own caucus, and also the House GOP versus the White House.
And don't forget the group we're not really talking about here, which are the Democrats. In Congress, you've got, exactly. And I feel like you've got, first of all, progressives are ready to get rolled again by President Obama, right? Like whatever he ends up doing, it's going to be becoming more closer toward the Republicans, so they're frustrated. And then you've got, sort of the irrelevant House Democrats at this point. But don't forget, Senate Democrats are in charge, so they have to sort of decide, are they going to be the responsible steward and prevent a government shutdown and join the Republicans, help them, or say, your problem?
Well, I was talking to a staffer in Senate Democratic leadership, and he was saying, unless the president gets on the field here in this budget fight, we're going to lose because the country's in a cutting spending mood. Jeff, the White House has a sort of the Obama 2.0 is a more detached White House, right? I mean, or is that what we're seeing here in terms of Obama's engagement? He's not anxious to get involved in a fight where he's got to defend Planned Parenthood today and defend funding for NIH tomorrow. Is he, or?
I think he's not eager to do that. And I think one sort of takeaway at halftime of the first term of the Obama administration was he was too much of a legislator in chief the first 2 years. He's trying to be a little bit, grander than that, bigger than that. I mean, setting aside the fact that the Middle East, and northern Egypt is quite literally blowing up, and this is a significant challenge for this president. Setting that aside, he does not want to become embroiled in these, these small details of the legislation. Every time he does not come out well. So it's one of the reasons that he put Vice President Biden in charge. I think another smart idea. But Bill Daley, the new chief of staff, and David Plouffe, the new senior advisor, not so new, are eager to keep this president slightly above it all. We'll see how long that works, because he was already faced some criticism from Ruth Marcus, a columnist in the Washington Post, saying, he's not around. But I think overall, the people in the country don't necessarily want their president to be out there line by line, doing things.
Doing everything. Jonathan, you wrote this week, we're going to pivot to 2012 and the campaign. You wrote this week about Republicans reassessing or coming to a common view about how difficult Obama will be to beat. Talk about that a little bit.
The conventional wisdom, I think, has shifted in the party, and sort of the way that I liken it is there was this sort of sense of euphoria leading up to and right after the midterm elections last year. And now, the morning after the party, they're sort of walking out in the sunlight, and they're grimacing a little bit because the sunlight is pretty bright, and it's not necessarily a bright day for them, to drag this metaphor on. But
we're all going to need sunglasses.
Exactly. But look, I think it's a sobering moment. Because they look at this president, and yes, he's got some weaknesses, but he's got a lot of advantages. First of all, he has the inherent advantages that any incumbent president has. They got Air Force One, they have the bully pulpit, they can be on national TV at any moment they want. But more than that, he's got demographic advantages. The same structural problems the GOP had in 2008 are still there among young voters and among minorities. And then lastly, and perhaps as important internally for the GOP than anything else, they can't pick a horse, it seems like. There's real concern over exactly who they're going to run. And I think when you're pining for other options, it says as much about the current field you have as it does those other options. And there's a lot of pining going on right now.
Right. It seems like every week there's a new candidate. They're saying, hey, what about this guy? Whether it's Christie or Jeb Bush or Christina.
Scott Walker even, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Fundraising, too. The president can raise a little bit of money, too.
Absolutely. And, he's going to be doing that tonight to help Senate Democrats who are really in this position of, oh, my gosh, we could lose the Senate in 2012, even if President Obama is reelected. We're going to be facing a Republican Senate. I mean, I think that's a very strong possibility.
Because there are 23 Senate Democrats who are up.
Yeah,
right?
and Patty Murray's having to defend them, and already there are 5 open seats that they're going to have to defend, and none of them are really that easy. I mean, I think Hawaii might be a little overstated with saying the Republicans have chances there because President Obama is going to be on the ballot, and he's I think he won by 72% in 2008 in that state, so I think he's probably going to be all right.
Jeff, I want to ask you about your trip to Georgia this week in terms of 2012. You were there, Newt Gingrich. First of all, explain the 3-step dance he did to get in. He's not in, he's intentional. What was that about? Just tell us what it was like to be there.
It was quite underwhelming to be there, to be quite frank. It was a very brief event. He was appearing with Governor Nathan Deal in a small governor's hearing room of the state capitol. No one in that Georgia capitol knew that this event was even going on unless they were watching it on television. No rally, no people. So what this was, the question that we don't know is why did they need to do it this week? I think it's one of those things where a few aides just got ahead of themselves. Speaker Gingrich had been saying for months he would decide by the end of February, first week of March. But don't underestimate Mr. Gingrich's sort of penchant for a bit of gamesmanship. He knew exactly what he was doing throughout this whole thing. He effectively becomes the first major candidate in the race. So he's testing the waters officially, as the FEC would call it. But by all intents and purposes, he's the first one raising money. He's in the race. But the reason it was so awkward is he's not finished with Newt Incorporated. Yeah. He still has paid speeches to give, so that is going to be the biggest transition for him, going from flying around on all those charter jets, really a first-class lifestyle, to having to live within the means of being a presidential candidate who's not independently wealthy. And yes, he has made some money over the years, but he does not have near the wealth that a Governor Romney would have. So he is exploring and testing and we'll see if he's in the race by the Iowa straw poll. I don't know.
And Jonathan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think for a lot of longtime Newt watchers, this week's events were all very familiar. He's always been somebody whose strength was not organization, shall we put it kindly. And I think the sort of start of this process when one of his advisors in Atlanta, Randy Evans, sort of opened the door saying it's going to happen, I think, in the next 8 days or so, told the Atlanta paper that. And then from there, it sort of went on. Jeff's story last Sunday as well. So I think he sort of saw a preview of what one of his great weaknesses is, which is discipline, lack of organization. So are we going to see a sort of version of that on the campaign trail of sort of Newt walking around the Capitol making news to sort of reporters as he leaves hearing rooms and his staff's back in the cubby hole saying, what did he say? I mean, it seemed like that was a sort of preview of things to come.
Well, let's hope he does that, because it'll all be good for us.
Right.
Well, Roll Call did a story this week from Under the Dome talking to members, and really Newt's coalition that he had way back when is completely gone. I mean, Boehner's certainly like sort of the only person left standing, and that's a little complicated relationship. And Santorum was obviously one of his cronies, and now he's going to be running for president as well. And so we sort of talked to members to get a sense of how much support is he really going to have, and that was Romney's big strength in 2008, was shoring up all of these members of Congress to stand with him, and what can Gingrich really have? But one comment that really stuck out to me was somebody said there's not a single campaign or Republican candidate that hasn't been touched by Newt in some way, whether it was campaigning for him or sending out emails for him. I mean, his influence is felt very far and wide.
I think it's also important to note how he is viewed in Washington is different from how he is viewed in Republican gatherings across the country. In working on the story I did last weekend, I spent quite a bit of time out at events with him. He is viewed through a new prism. I think largely because of his very frequent appearances over the years on Fox News. 17 years ago is a long time. A lot of those supporters or voters or detractors are dead. There's a whole new generation of voters. So I think it would be a mistake to, for Washington to sort of thumb its nose at him and think it's not possible. Because some people, if he doesn't win the nomination, he can still have a significant effect on the nomination.
How do they view him? I mean, is he, if you had to sum it up with the way
he's viewed as the ideas man who can solve the problem. And yes, there is a problem, and perhaps he can solve it. And then another thing we saw yesterday, perhaps more substantively than his website, we saw how he's going to run if he does, with his wife, Callista Gingrich, his third wife, at his side. That was no accident. They are a true partnership. They are a true a package, if you will, and they're hoping that all the chatter about this happens now, not months from now. I think there's enough to talk about, until 2012.
Well, they did, Jonathan, seem to be grabbing. Rudy Giuliani had this same problem.
Yes.
And the woman who broke up his previous marriage is now his wife. Rudy Giuliani kept his wife off stage. As Jeff mentions, Callista Gingrich is front and center. They are grabbing this problem and figuring out how much of a problem it's going to be. What's your sense of how that works?
I'm really curious because covering the Giuliani campaign, she was very reluctant to ever talk to the press, and they went to great lengths to keep her shielded from the press. I think she would occasionally do Fox, but that's about it. But she was there as a physical presence at a lot of events. What I'm curious about with Speaker Gingrich is, we know now, as Jeff mentioned, that his wife Callista is going to be there at the events. That was clear in Atlanta yesterday. That's clear on the website, where her picture is very prominent.
It's almost bigger than his.
That's right. But is she going to be talking to the media? Is she going to sort of be, taking questions occasionally, or is she going to be, very sort of restrained in the fashion of Judith Giuliani in 2008?
How much do we think this actually matters? Is it just us and the chattering, or do voters give a darn about this?
I think it's a little bit bigger than us. I talked to activists in Iowa and New Hampshire this week for a story about Speaker Gingrich, and without even being asked about, both of them brought it up. So it's definitely on the consciousness. I don't know if it's determinative, though, if it's sort of a deal breaker for him, but it's definitely, I think, on the minds of folks beyond just here in D.C.
But do you feel like he's sort of part of that older generation? I mean, when you look at the field of the likely presidential contenders on the Republican side, you sort of got this younger group And then here's Gingrich. He's from the past sort of
Yeah.
era. He's from the past generation. Can he step in and be the grown-up, perhaps?
Yeah.
Or is that going to turn
Right.
voters off when they're looking at a young, energetic president who is able to get young people?
It's a great question. We know that he can be a messenger. The question is, can he be a new messenger at a new time?
Yeah.
And I think Jonathan's right. Voters do have concerns about this, but he has built a stronger relationship with churches and with social conservative leaders across the country than we know. Fascinating Los Angeles Times story this week, who was quoting a pastor at the Rock Rapids Church or something in Iowa, a very conservative part of the state, loves Newt Gingrich. So I'm not sure that that it's going to be as big of a problem. Of course, in the end of any campaign, if he's still involved, watch what shows up in the mailboxes, et cetera. Are there pictures of the three wives? I mean, there's a lot of fodder there to hit him on.
And I think we probably all had conversations with members of other campaigns who are just trying to get us to do the work and saying things to
You had
us.
a quote in the story this week.
I talk about this in the third person as if I'm talking about somebody else. That's right. In a piece I wrote this week, an advisor for one of the other campaigns said no woman can, understand what he did to his previous wife.
I think, though, that his larger problem than just this sort of question about the marriages is, Jeff touched on this, he's seen to a newer generation as the smart guy on Fox News, as Bill Kristol put it to me this week. Can he be seen as a president? Can he get beyond that sort of, and even though the sort of line between politician and pundit has blurred in recent years, there's still a line there. I think he's sort of moved a little bit towards the pundit side. Can he get back firmly to the side of politician and be seen by voters as this guy can be commander-in-chief, he can be president, and sort of move beyond that role of just the smart guy on Fox? I think that perhaps is why he's getting out so soon. He's got to sort of make that case right now for a sustained period of time of, yes, I can be president. I have the sort of discipline. I have the ideas. I have the maturity to actually fill this office.
In 2008, remember we talked a lot about how Bill Clinton had been out of the arena for a while and was
Yes.
sort of rusty with new politics. I mean, Newt Gingrich has not been on a ballot since 1998.
And had no race,
I
right?
mean,
Yeah.
and he's not had a race.
Yeah.
His toughest race was 1978 after he lost two. So he does have some adjusting to do, without a doubt.
You know what I'd forgotten is in 1990 he only won his congressional race by less than 1,000 votes. I mean, he could have
He
been
had
done.
lost twice before that.
In his very first race, he lost twice in 72 and 76, but in 90 he won only by like 800 votes.
90 you're saying, yeah.
So in 90, if he hadn't, 800 votes, and there's no revolution, no balanced budget,
Something
no,
90,
it's
yeah.
amazing.
And think about the record too of again these other contenders. They all have records as governor, as former members, whatever it is, to sort of defend in the more recent past. Newt Gingrich. There's not a lot of YouTube of him from way back when. I mean, you can search the C-SPAN archives, and I'm sure people are.
We didn't work this out, but you're foreshadowing something. Let me ask you the final question to all of you, which, Jeff, I'll start with you. Has the gun gone off, the starting gun here? I mean, is Romney coming? I mean, Romney's already running, and so is Pawlenty, but I mean, will we start to see an actual campaign instead of this shadow campaign?
I think we will. I think the gun is off, if for no other reason than we all have fired it. But
But we've been trying for months.
No, but I think I think it's beginning to go off. I mean, you have Governor Romney making his first trip to New Hampshire this weekend. Former Governor Pawlenty is everywhere. I think it has gone off. I mean, it is March. It's not that early. I think this next month will be much more intense, and it will be going forward.
And I think the contenders are very aware of what Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama went through in 2008 and how long that went. I mean, it really wasn't resolved until June.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody's sort of thinking, boy, that's somewhat possible. Let's sort of wait and take a few little breaths before we really start this long haul.
Last word to you, John.
And nobody wants a target on their back either, especially some of the folks like Romney who are seen as having a pretty good shot to win. So they're pushing this thing back for as long as they can. But until Sarah Palin says what she's going to do, which is not going to be anytime soon, we'll be getting a lot of breathless sort of reports about that, I'm sure.
That's right. Well, thank all of you very much for joining us on this Friday. It was a great fun. That's it for Washington Unplugged. Before we leave you, we've got one little piece of videotape that we want to show you. Christina mentioned it even though she didn't know about it. It's a young Georgia congressman in the early 80s. He's talking about a budget fight that's going on, and it's so familiar to today, even the 2-week window he talks about is the same. Take a look.
The only correct course tonight is to defeat the 2 remaining budgets. The nation will not collapse with a 2-week wait, but the nation and the economy may well collapse if in a moment of panic and desire to avoid working next week, we adopt a high tax, high inflation, high interest rate, big bankruptcy, pork barrel budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.